Hello, everybody. My name is Rocky Tong, and I'm the head of policy research with the Financial Service Development Council. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we are announcing a report entitled Fueling Further Growth of Biotech and Healthcare Industries, Leveraging Hong Kong's Financial Infrastructure. And with us today, we have four distinguished speakers. On my left is Mr. Rex Ho. He is a member of our New Business Committee, and he is also a partner with PwC. Next to Rex, we have Ms. Winnie Wong. She is our board member. She is also the convener of the New Business Committee, and she is the leader of this very working group. Winnie is also the CEO of Avo Insurance as well as the Asia Insurance company. Next to Winnie would be Danny, Mr. Danny Lee. He is a partner with Blue Pool Capital. And of course, he is also a member of the FSDC New Business Committee. Then on the far end is Dr. King Au. King is our executive director, and he runs the operation of the Financial Service Development Council. As everybody is aware, Hong Kong has entered into a new chapter of a very quick growth in terms of listing biotech companies since 2018 as the listing reform has taken place. Since then, under Chapter 18A, as of the end of the first half of this year, we have seen 33 of such companies listing in Hong Kong, making Hong Kong the second leading biotech capital formation center during the course. Of course, we're not resting on our laurels, and we always see room for improvement. And with that particular insight in mind, we put together a working group of very seasoned professionals in relevant fields, hoping to make recommendations for the government and other stakeholders to consider. Now, we have identified three major areas of potential improvement, including Hong Kong being a talent hub for professionals and firms alike to be based here in Hong Kong. Secondly, it will be related to financing. And last but not the least, Hong Kong has a role to play in terms of commercialization for these companies. And with that in mind, I would like to invite Winnie, who is, as I mentioned earlier, the leader of this working group, to detail the key findings of our report. And after that, we will be opening the floor for questions. We have designed some questions for all the speakers. And after that, we will be listening to your questions and trying to address them afterwards. And with that, Winnie, may I pass the floor to you, please?
Yeah, thank you, Rocky. Thank you for joining the press conference today. And I'm sure you can see the slides as well. First of all, I would like to provide some background and overview on the project. Of course, we have already got a very solid foundation of healthcare system in Hong Kong. And there is a steep rise of health expenditure over the past 3 decades, growing at an average annual rate of 5.6% over the past 10 years, which is even higher than the average GDP growth rate. And the government also identified biotech as one of the 4 key areas to develop innovation and technology. And of course, Hong Kong is also the most sought after listing venues for global healthcare and biotech companies after the reform of Hong Kong Exchange in 2018, opening doors for pre-revenue biotech companies to be listed on its main boards. And Chapter 18A, as Rocky mentioned, it helps to provide much more convenience for these pre-revenue companies to be listed in Hong Kong. And as of May 2021, this year, Hong Kong is home to approximately 300 biotech-related companies with pharmaceuticals, traditional Chinese medicine, medical devices, etc. In terms of the global landscape of healthcare and biotech sectors, in a recent report published by WHO, the global spending on health in 2018 reached $3.8 trillion, a 10% increase, 10% of the global GDP. And we believe that it will be much higher due to the global pandemic. And there are also some recent developments of the healthcare and biotech sectors, including digitalization, such as the adoption of telemedicine and popularity of virtual care, AI-based medical diagnosis, etc. And the second trend that we have seen is on IP financing, which is getting more popular in Europe as well as in the US. But of course, it's new to the Asian market, which we believe there's room for Hong Kong to play a role here. And for the global market, capital market activities, there's a very robust performance last year, and PE deal volume in the healthcare sector reached 380 deals in 2020, representing a 21% year-on-year increase from the previous year. And there is a very notable global surge of IPO activities in the form of SPAC last year. Last year, among 248 SPACs formed across the globe, among 56 of them had a focus on healthcare, around 23% on healthcare and biotech. And in terms of the biotech landscape in the US, mainland China, and EU, the US remains the center of healthcare and biotech financing. In Europe, there's very solid infrastructure and resources to shape the biotech hub. And in the mainland China, there's also very strong policy support to foster the development of the sector. And according to the National 14th Five-Year Plan, there's very strong emphasis on IT, biotech, high-end equipment, and new energy vehicles in order to stimulate growth of advanced manufacturing. And the next slide, we want to outline the opportunities and challenges for Hong Kong. In terms of opportunities, we can capitalize on the dynamic financial markets. Hong Kong can act as a healthcare and pre-revenue biotech listing hub for these biotech companies, as well as we can reach out to different classes of investors locally as well as internationally. And second, we can embrace digitalization in biotech and healthcare, riding on our high internet penetration rate as well as existing infrastructure. We can also act as a gateway to the mainland China with CEPA and GBA development. Hong Kong connects major research facilities and institutions locally and in the GBA to foster information flows and industry knowledge. But there are also challenges on three key areas, according to our survey, as well as interview findings. The first challenge is on financing. And according to respondents from our surveys, as well as interviews, and our working group members' feedback, they express difficulties in financing in one form or another at different stages. And investors have lower risk appetite and prefer investing in startups at a later development stage. And the second challenge is on talent shortage. The difficulty in acquiring the right talents is frequently mentioned as a key issue to these businesses. And almost 2/3 of the survey respondents had obtained support from the talent programs provided by the government. And the third challenge is on commercialization. The difference in regulatory requirements across markets was indicated as a big hurdle to the commercialization process. The next few slides, we would like to highlight our recommendations around these three key areas on talent, financing, as well as commercialization at different stages of development of these companies as well. First of all, at the early stage, on the talent side, we propose including commercial-related contributions in university professorship assessments and promote the existence and benefits of Hong Kong's talent list to facilitate immigration of qualified talent in the biotech and healthcare sector. And at the growth stage, we propose increasing allocation of endowment funds by universities for health and biotech-related research, and government-funded overseas programs for homegrown talents as well. At the mature stage, we propose establishing mentorship programs which will require private sector's participation to nurture our younger companies. On the financing side, at the early stage, which is very challenging for a lot of these startups, we propose having more government-led incubation programs and grant schemes. And at the growth stage, we propose project co-investment by asset owners convened by the public sector and strategic investments from the Future Fund and the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio. While at the mature stage, we propose reviewing and renewing the rules and practices of the financial market continuously. On commercialization, at the early stage, we propose providing more access to co-working space and labs at discounted prices and set up dedicated commercialization work stream and department in research universities. At growth stage, we propose having more promotional opportunities for these homegrown startups and facilitate more cross-boundary M&A activities through creating and nurturing B2B and business to investor events and relationships. While at the mature stage, we propose pursuing mutual recognition of standards with key markets in relation to service and product offerings. The subsequent slides provide more detail on our recommendations. For talent on the early stage, I'm sure you are aware of the fact that there's a talent list of the Hong Kong government, which has identified pharmaceutical and life science and biotech as one of the key areas of focus under the innovation and technology experts category. And the government's determination for opening up the invitation of overseas talent to come and work in Hong Kong. And we propose equipping and attracting talent with multidisciplinary skill sets and mindsets, which is in big shortage right now. And universities may consider incentivizing students with life science majors to take part in business and management related courses and access relevant training materials at no additional cost. And the launch of open access to such course materials would be very helpful as well, because there are a lot of well-renowned institutions with developed materials that can be shared to them. And at the growth stage, we propose universities to invest in their own research and researchers. And they can consider allocating and investing a higher share of their endowment funds in projects led by affiliated professors and researchers. And on the salary side, we believe that there can be more subsidies because the cost of living in Hong Kong is really high, which has been cited as a major hindrance to drawing talent to Hong Kong. And we can take reference to the Fast and First program introduced by the government amidst the pandemic, and salary subsidies may be provided to jumpstart the further development of the industry. And the financing early stage, we do want to nurture the ecosystem, so a diversification of financial channels should be established. First, we hope the government can set aside a reasonable budget and on healthcare and biotech related research and development activities. And there should be a more transparent mechanism for the public sector funding schemes. And they can lay out examples and successful and unsuccessful applications, developing fund-specific FAQs and streamline the entire application process. There should also be a phased approach in order to better manage the risk of public funding abuses. And tax incentives, probably later on Rex can comment more, it can of course help to encourage investment as well by mobilizing the private sector to invest in these innovative but not yet proven companies. In the financing growth stage, we recommend seeking investment from local investors. The public sector players such as the Cyberport and the Science Park can set up a group of asset owners, for example, family offices, to co-invest in winners of certain competitions. And staunch government support, such as the Future Fund and the Hong Kong Growth Portfolio, should consider putting stronger emphasis on the healthcare and biotech industries. Then for commercialization early stage, we propose on the price and availability of lab spaces, we can definitely do more. The Cyberport and Science Park can prioritize the extension support to smaller scale startups in the talent selection process, as well as granting access to lab facilities to these startups. And the government can provide more subsidies to potential entrepreneurs, covering the rental of lab and co-working space. While on the technology transfer side, we propose having more technology transfer offices. Universities in Hong Kong should consider reviewing and modernizing the operation model of such offices and provide more incentive schemes. And at the growth stage, which is also very important for commercialization, we propose more promotional opportunities for homegrown startups. For example, Invest Hong Kong as well as TDC can help to brush up its promotional efforts and provide opportunities for homegrown startups. And the public sector bodies could create and nurture B2B and business to investor events to better facilitate cross-boundary investments and M&A activities. And IP protection and development is also very crucial, and which is an area that Hong Kong can play a bigger role as a regional IP trading center. According to the National 14th Five-Year Plan, the IP department should continue to forge strengthened cooperation internationally and with the mainland, starting with the GBA to promote IP awareness and development. So I think that's the key points of our recommendations. And of course, we welcome questions from the audience.
Thank you very much, Winnie. I think during the last 15 minutes, you have detailed why we are doing this and some of the key recommendations that we have come across. Now we're going to have a panel session with the 4 distinguished speakers. I'd like to first have a question for Dr. King now. King, out of so many sectors, why are we looking into healthcare and biotech sectors? And how do you think that it can play into the development of Hong Kong's financial services sector?
Thank you, Rocky. Winnie has already covered a lot of key issues and arguments. I just want to highlight that Hong Kong actually now has the highest life expectancy in the world, thanks to our advanced healthcare services. This is certainly very good news for all of us. But then, about 1/3 of our population is expected to be at 65 or above in 2039. So in fact, aging population is really a global phenomenon because the United Nations has declared this decade, 2021 to 2030, as the decade of healthy aging. And therefore, it is an understatement to say that the advancements of healthcare and biotech industries are really very essential to all our well-being. As Winnie highlighted, we've been quite successful in providing IPO fundraising for biotech companies. I think Hong Kong being a well-established international financial center, we have the necessary ecosystem to make Hong Kong really a global fundraising hub, both through public and private capital for the healthcare and biotech industry in Asia time zone. I also want to share some more information on the biotech scene and healthcare landscape in Hong Kong. I think for biotech, again, as Winnie mentioned, Science Park has done a lot. The Hong Kong government also have provided a lot of support as well. So we now have over 250 biotech companies in Hong Kong. And of that, at least 150 are actually being nurtured by Science Park. And some of them are actually world-class standard. And in terms of healthcare, I'm very pleased to inform everyone, if you have not already read the report, Hong Kong actually ranks 8th in the World Index of Healthcare Innovation. And we have a very diverse market here, both provided by the public and private sectors. In fact, even the business model is changing, like virtual insurance. And with the recent introduction of digitalization of our healthcare sector, I'm sure there will be a lot of growth opportunities. And last but not least, we also have now indices for biotech companies, so that will also provide means for global investors to tap into our biotech sector.
Thanks a lot, King. I think you mentioned a lot of very important points, from aging to financing for both mature and startup companies, as well as the important role that insurance plays in this journey. I think Hong Kong does have a lot to offer. Winnie, I want to come back to you. Well, now that Hong Kong is a very good financial center, and at the same time, we do already host quite a few healthcare and biotech startups. How can you perhaps share the outlook of Hong Kong in terms of these sectors with us? And as a matter of fact, can you point out how attractive Hong Kong is comparing to the other jurisdictions in offering services to these firms?
Yeah, thank you, Rocky. I think with the introduction of the new rules by the Hong Kong Exchange, we have achieved some initial success in terms of permitting listing of pre-revenue biotech issuers to list on the main board, and permitting listing of innovative companies with weighted voting right structures, and establishing a new concessionary secondary listing route for the Greater China and international companies that wish to secondary list in Hong Kong. And since then, Hong Kong has become the largest public financing hub for healthcare and biotech companies in Asia, and second largest in the world, with 33 pre-revenue biotech companies listing in Hong Kong as of June this year. So of course, more can be done to make it more business friendly for these companies to be listed in Hong Kong. And that's why we have this paper providing a number of additional recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Winnie. This is very good for that. Like our listing regime does offer a lot of leeway for companies considering where they should go public and seek financing resources. Danny, talking about financing resources, you are the expert in the field on this panel. Having so much experience in the private equity field, how does the recent global capital market landscape look like for healthcare and biotech sector, please?
Yeah, I think Winnie already touched upon that a little bit. I think the overall financial market's been very positive for the space. I think COVID was part of a driver. It made the whole world suddenly realize how important healthcare and biotech is in our lives, and how attractive some of the opportunities might come along. I would say from where I sit as an investor in both funds and direct investments, we see that has been a boom in terms of both exit for a lot of funds, achieving exits on the public markets, both in the US and in Hong Kong. And some of these companies that Winnie mentioned were actually part of our portfolio companies and the funds that we invested into. So I think it's a good thing. This in a way creates a virtuous cycle, because when you allow venture capitalists to exit to realize profit, it benefits the company, the investors, and then the funds can go raise more money, which is what's happening now. We're seeing a lot more funds both in China and the US are coming to market, raising more funds, which means there will be more dry powder for the companies, for the 250 companies that King was talking about. There will be more money for them to access, to develop and continue to grow. So this creates a virtuous cycle. So this trend right now is in general very positive for the space.
Fantastic. Good to know that, the outlook is positive. Positive, it means that it's not only directly influencing or impacting the sectors that are directly related, but also those providing services to such firms. And Rex, you are, providing a lot of such services to such firms. And we realized that digitalization is becoming a big thing, and it is also having some positive influence on the sector as well. So how can healthcare and biotech companies leverage digitalization in Hong Kong to accelerate their business development?
Yeah, definitely. I think digitalization, digital transformation, based on a lot of that survey of the CEO, this is probably one of the highest agenda item within the organization or industry. So I think healthcare, biotech industry should not be an exception. In fact, I think we see that digital transformation trend, in fact, it started before the pandemic, but as Danny talked about, I think COVID, basically during the COVID period, what we have seen is the trend got accelerated, but not slowed down, right? Because of the social distancing, people right now are looking for alternative ways to get customer connected to the business. People get more used to go online. So for the healthcare sector, people are probably looking for remote consultation. So these are the area that I think we see a lot of the opportunity on digitalization. Also, data, AI. Right now, I think for the healthcare sector, it's more easy actually to get customer data, to leverage on customer data, obtain customer data, to provide better services to the end customer. So these are the area that I would say for digitalization, definitely we have seen a lot of the growth potential. And don't forget, I think Hong Kong has a very high internet penetration rate for both individual, for business. This definitely can actually help to foster the development and the expansion of providing a digital health industry in Hong Kong.
Absolutely. We have the internet penetration rate at around 90%. So, I guess this is really good for such services. Telemedicine is not only big in Hong Kong, but also in other places. So I guess Hong Kong is going to leverage such trends. Winnie, I'm sure insurance industry is also playing a big part in this journey, and one of your companies is also like a virtual insurer, one of the 4 permitted to carry on such business here in Hong Kong. So perhaps you can share with us how the insurance sector is contributing or utilizing the biotech-related business, and of course healthcare business too.
Yeah, sure. I believe the insurance sector can definitely play a very crucial role in supporting and developing the biotech and healthcare sector. In the paper, we mentioned a bit about IP financing, which is getting more popular in Europe and in the US. We hope that there will be increasing popularity in Asia as well. Basically, insurance companies can assess the risk and underwrite the IP risk, so that the banks can have confidence in providing the financing support to these companies. So it's something that definitely the insurance industry can help by transferring part of the risks that our financing companies and banks are worried about. But of course, we have to be able to assess the data and underwrite the risks first. And the second area is, of course, the more traditional product liability and professional liability insurance that these biotech and health companies would have to be able to arrange to protect themselves and increase consumer confidence as well. And the third area, in fact, insurance companies are, in many countries, the largest or second largest payer of medical services. And that's why we can have a very crucial role to play as an investor into these healthcare and biotech companies in supporting them to grow, especially at the initial stage. Very often we work with them on some POC projects to support some of the initial biotech or healthcare ideas. And in fact, a lot of those are highly related to the services and the risks of the insurance companies underwrite. So there is a very good ecosystem that the insurance companies and insurance sector can support. And of course, in Hong Kong, we see that insurance companies have already started to play such a role in the commercialization process, especially at the early stage, when they lack support from some of the other professional investors. Insurance companies very often can work with them on some smaller projects to start with as a financial supporter or strategic partner or user of their services. So I think that shows that the insurance sector can have many different roles to play and in helping them to grow in different perspectives.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Winnie. We still have quite a bit of questions for the panelists, but for those of you who are in the audience, if you have any questions, please do input them in the Q&A box, and then we'll be able to raise such questions to the panelists accordingly afterwards. And Danny, I'm going to come back to you. Fundraising is extremely important in the journey of an entrepreneur. And Hong Kong is already the second largest listing venue for relevant sectors and players. And at the same time, Hong Kong is also the second largest private equity market in Asia. So with us being so many seconds, how can we leverage our roles even better?
Yeah, no, I think, US historically has been the clear dominant player because it's a very liquid market. It allows the investor to exit, a pre-revenue type of companies. I think Hong Kong recently have caught up to that. So I think, and given the clear listing rules, the liquid, market that we have, I think, once we open up this channel, you can see how quickly we become second. And I think it's a matter of time when we become the number one. So I think the strength that we have, a lot of people would, I'm not going to repeat like how good Hong Kong is as a listing venue for, basically Chinese companies or anywhere Asian companies, clearly the most liquid in all of Asia. But there's one thing I think a lot of people don't think about, but it's actually very important for all kinds of companies, and particularly biotech companies, and that's the ESOP program. So a lot of people have, when you have to attract talent, you have to have ESOP programs to keep people. But it's actually very difficult to design ESOP problems or programs in China. It's not so liquid. It's not so easy to recognize. There's some tax issues. But if you set up a company in Hong Kong, or if you come list in Hong Kong, those become a non-issue. It's very international. US companies, American companies, European companies are very comfortable with how this works. The receiver themselves are comfortable. The ESOP program can be actually realized and turned into monetary, rewards. I think that's actually very important that people overlook. Then you can have real companies with can attract real talent. And as we all know that, we talked about talent in our recommendation, that is one of the most critical points for biotech or for anything in general. But I think that's a key point that in Hong Kong that I think a lot of people overlook.
Fantastic, the ESOP program. For those of you in the audience, check it out if you haven't already. Now, Winnie, I'm going to come back to you. In our research process, we have identified three major areas, as I mentioned: talent, financing, and commercialization. And among those three, I think it was quite clear to us that talent was the top of the priority. And, there's always a global war for talent. What approaches are different countries and regions taking, and how should Hong Kong fight this battle?
Yeah, fully agree. We are all fighting for talent. In Hong Kong, at least the two areas that we can do. One, of course, we focus on developing more homegrown talent ourselves in terms of university programs, in terms of government support, funding programs, sponsorship programs, mentoring, etc. So all these will be helpful in developing more homegrown talents. But of course, it takes time for homegrown talents to be developed to be able to meet the demand, increasing demand in Hong Kong. So at the same time, what we have been doing is to attract and retain overseas talents to come work and develop the business in Hong Kong. My view is we have to be focused on creating a business-friendly environment with a lot of business and commercialization opportunities for them to develop and thrive in Hong Kong. Of course, IP protection is also very important. And all these, I think we have the fundamentals to be able to support them. And talents are always attracted to cities where there are most opportunities. So commercialization is a key part, and that's why we focus a lot on highlighting how the Hong Kong government can help in terms of providing and facilitating more commercialization opportunities, not just in Hong Kong, of course, beyond Hong Kong into the GBA area and the China market. All these would be very attractive for them with their IP protected in Hong Kong. So I think we've got all the fundamentals right in terms of financing and commercialization opportunities. So if we get all these right, we should be able to attract and retain more talent, while at the same time, we focus on developing more homegrown talents ourselves.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, yes, not only Winnie, Danny, and Rex mentioned during the research process that talent was very important, but also many of our board members, as we discussed with them, also said that. So hopefully we can fight this war for talent, and win it. Danny, I'm coming back to you because you are the financing expert for us. We talked a lot about our strengths and opportunities and whatnot. So what is the most pressing issue for us to be the financing hub for these companies? And what do you look at when it comes to investing in healthcare and biotech startups?
Yeah, so I think we already talked about this, but both in biotech and in investments, talent, people are the most important resource. That's probably the only resource that matters. So same thing for financing ecosystem. I think Hong Kong is already starting to develop that, because in the past, we didn't really have a lot of research analysts or portfolio managers that understand biotech and healthcare. So the market, understandably, is very small because investors can't go to people to ask questions. I think once we get more of those talent in, things will improve. And that's also partially driven by more and more companies being listed, right? Because then the banks will say, okay, there is now more clients to cover, then they will allocate resources. So this is kind of again, it's a cycle that you need to work through. I think Hong Kong's already on the right first steps. We need to keep that up and make sure we keep attracting people, both on the research side as well as on the VC side. I think on the VC side, a lot of Chinese investors are still based in mainland, but having an office in Hong Kong, I think would be helpful. There are some, I'm seeing there are some, investors that are perhaps based in Hong Kong, but are investing globally in the US as well. We should definitely encourage more of those people to come. They don't have to be from China or just Hong Kong. They could be from Korea, Japan, or anywhere else, and take advantage of, how easy it is to list, right? Because the companies are the same. As long as they're profitable and they're doing well, or they have innovative products, they will do well, and Hong Kong will always be a good venue for them. When it comes to investing in startups, I think again is the talent, probably mostly across the border. That's probably the easiest. I think some of the Hong Kong policies right now, as building out, more linkage with GBA and all of that, I think is good. I think in our report, in our recommendations, we already mentioned, in terms of tax incentive, in terms of residents and et cetera, to attract more of these talent in. I think there's plenty of them across the border, plenty of them in GBA. I mean, GBA size is bigger than France. So we can certainly get a lot more talent to Hong Kong.
Fantastic. Again, no matter what questions we are asking, it really comes back to the availability and abundancy of talent. Rex, I'm going to ask a question, and that would be very simple for you because you are the tax expert with us. So how does Hong Kong compare to the other comparable jurisdictions in terms of tax regime for startup financing and tax incentives for startup investments?
Okay, in terms of the startup financing, Hong Kong, as far as tax incentives concerned, Hong Kong has the Unified Fund Exemption regime, which provide tax exemption to investment fund who invest in startup company. So when the investment fund derive a gain upon exit, then as long as they fulfill certain conditions, then they can get exemption in Hong Kong. So in fact, this is a very good regime, which can encourage investment fund to actually make investment in startup company and also provide funding to support their growth. Now, in fact, this is one approach is to provide exemption on exit. In fact, if you actually look at the other jurisdiction, probably there's also some area that we can actually learn. Some jurisdiction, in fact, adopt a little bit different approach. Is they provide tax relief to not only investment funds, but also to other investor, angel investor, VC investor, to give them tax relief when they make the investment. Say, for example, in Turkey, in Sweden, then they allow tax relief to the angel investor, VC investor, tax break in respect of the capital that they put in the startup company. Say, closer to home in China, so some of the VC company and also the partners of the VC partnership, they can get up to 70% tax relief on the capital that they put in small to medium-sized technology company, say when their investment reach 2 years. Something similar policy also in you will find in Malaysia. So I think this is an area that Hong Kong government can consider to make reference in order to enhance that regime to attract more investor to put in their money into the startup company. Of course, we actually talk a lot about, say, attracting talent. So this is also another area that I think we can consider whether we should provide more incentive to attract talent to Hong Kong.
That government does play a very important role in developing our ecosystem and enhancing our competitiveness. So hopefully, like after the publication of this paper, we can work closely with relevant stakeholders. King, before I, jump to the Q&A session, I would like to ask you this question. During our research process, we have seen that many respondents do target Hong Kong as a target market, but the majority of them actually look to mainland China for such business opportunities. So from our perspective, what can Hong Kong do more to facilitate commercialization locally, regionally, and globally?
Well, first of all, I think that finding is as expected because Hong Kong is the super connector, right? So the other panelists have already highlighted the core strength of Hong Kong. So I would like to elaborate a little bit more on, first of all, commercialization. I would like to compare Hong Kong to Israel, right? Israel has a very small population, if I remember correctly, about 9 million, something. And yet they are probably the second most innovative country in the world. So how do they commercialize their ideas, right? They market their innovation to other countries. And we have an advantage in our homeland, next door, right? So GPA, Danny already mentioned, is a huge market. So I think definitely, we want to play up this core strength of Hong Kong, the uniqueness of Hong Kong as a super connector. And also in terms of intellectual property, that's also very important because Hong Kong has a very well-established IP services industry. In fact, Hong Kong already is the leading IP trading hub in Asia. So definitely we facilitate innovation. It's not just healthcare and biotech. In fact, other startups should really consider this competitiveness of Hong Kong. And in terms of, again, commercialization, there are a lot of international research collaboration among universities in Hong Kong, especially in the healthcare sector. I know both some of the universities have world-class professors. Some of them, at least I know one of them is tipped to be a Nobel Prize winner. So that definitely is again where Hong Kong plays this international role. It's very important. And to overseas research companies, investors, again, if they look at Hong Kong, they should look at the 1.4 billion market next door. Right? They can access to that largest market, right? A single market through Hong Kong. And then he also mentioned the importance of an employee share option scheme. I think that's alignment of interest. And that, again, another unique strength of Hong Kong. So to conclude, I think the public-private partnership, that's what we're proposing in our paper. It's important for training, funding, and commercialization.
Fantastic, King. We have received quite a few questions from the floor. I'm going to raise them to the panelists and feel free to chip in whenever and wherever possible. Can you identify some challenges that startups are facing in terms of technology transfer in the ecosystem of Hong Kong? Anyone can share their insights with the audience?
I guess I'll take a crack at it. I think it's still very early. I think that's the first thing. I personally have not done one myself, so hard to comment. But I think this type of technology transfer happens in the West a bit more often. We have invested in some of these early stage university-centric type of investment firms. It's just very unique structures, but they're not really a company. They're more of a company rather than a fund, but they invest in university startups and things like that. And there's a lot of technology transfer that happening in that. I think Hong Kong on that is early. My understanding is that we have the basis for that. There's a lot of medical research, good medical research that's actually being done out of Hong Kong. But a lot of it is still kind of stuck at the R level rather than on the ability to do the transfer to make it into more commercial. So that's something that I think we need to work on. The challenge I think is it's still new, so we need people to kind of take the first step.
On that one, I want to echo Danny. Actually, I want to also highlight biotech research. It has very long tenure, unlike probably other industry. So the stable long-term investment from both the government and private sector are very important. So with the involvement of insurance company, I think that's very healthy because they have decades of investment horizon. And I think maybe the government can also review some of the subsidy scheme to see whether we need to tailor-made it for the biotech sector, to match their research horizon.
And on that note, actually during the research process, some of those interviews that we had done with the industry practitioners, they were saying that Hong Kong may not have the advantage in other areas, but in terms of diagnostic research, because it can be elspread to the other places as well, applicable to the other places as well. This may be something that we can look at. Okay, so we have other questions from the floor. Wei Ximing. Recently, many biotechnology companies have fallen below the issue price. Do you think this will have an adverse effect on other biotech companies when they choose which market to go for their IPOs?
I guess that falls to them. So first of all, I'm happy to say that some of our investments actually have not fallen below. So it's not everybody's falling below the market. So look, I think recently, clearly, the Asian market, China market, Hong Kong market has taken a hit, for a lot of other reasons, some regulatory driven. But this happens everywhere. It happens in the US all the time. Markets go through a cycle, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. The reason for some of the decline is also because some of these companies, as we mentioned, they are pre-revenue, pre-profit. So everyone is waiting for the next benchmark. So they have to show, this is not about just listing the company too. You have to show that you have real products and your drugs work and you pass phase 3, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the market is waiting for that. And until then, liquidity is low. Recently, market has not been, very hot in this region. So I think those are normal. Ultimately, I think, investors are longer term and they will see those, if they succeed, you will see these things pop. But, until then, probably have to wait a little bit, have to be a bit more patient.
Great. That is probably one of the reasons why the Hong Kong Stock Exchange does require such biotech companies listed under Chapter 18A to have the letter B as an identifier, such that investors would be aware of the different characteristics from our traditional companies. And we see that another message or question from Carol is commercialization is a turning point for healthcare and biotech companies. What does the commercialization landscape and process in Hong Kong look like? Are support available and sufficient for these companies?
I can comment a bit on this based on the findings that we have from the survey respondents as well as from the interviews that we conducted with all these industry players. Of course, when they're at different stages, they may encounter different challenges. And that's why we propose recommendations according to the different stages. For the startup phases, I think it's quite hard for them to get sufficient financing. And this is an area that we believe the government can come in to help a bit more. And that's why we also mentioned about some of the relevant industry players in the ecosystem, like insurance companies can play a bigger role in arriving at some synergies with these startup companies and support them to have the initial financing support and commercialization support based on some POC projects that they work with them. And of course, at a later stage, in terms of commercialization, they would, of course, want to work in a bigger market and apply and commercialize in a bigger GBA and China market, Asian market. So on that, we proposed more regulatory alignment or mutual recognition schemes to be achieved with these overseas countries as well as with the mainland China, so that it would be a lot easier to facilitate commercialization in those markets. Otherwise, this will be a big challenge to them as well.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, because again, going back to universities, they're the best place to incubate, these new ideas and commercialization. So I think in the report you mentioned about the technology transfer offices at universities. I think what Ben said, the ESOPs, can potentially apply to those offices as well, so that there's a strong alignment of interest. And also there are a lot of collaboration between Hong Kong universities and mainland universities. So that is another way we can commercialize our ideas in a much bigger market than Hong Kong.
That's one last point I'd like to add is one key point on commercialization is testing. For example, for drugs, you need to test bigger batches. So you can't make them out of a lab in in a couple of grams. You need to make them in kilograms. I think one area that I heard from some of the companies we talked to is that they would like a bit more facility for them to test some of these things, because you actually need like a chemical plant, like a small miniature chemical plant with a big jar and a big vat and that kind of thing to make these kind of products. It's not that easy to access, I think, in Hong Kong today. If there will be more of that, I think more company would come and utilize those assets for commercialization, because a lot of it is stuck in the lab. And you cannot move to commercialization unless you have, scalable production. So I think that's, at least for drugs, I think that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have one last question, and that should Hong Kong also be focusing on manufacturing our own medicine and vaccines instead of, relying on the production lines of the other regions? Can I have go? I used to be an economic researcher, and so I always think about our competitive advantage, and in the ideal world where trade friction is actually low, we should rely on trade, and so competitive advantage should always be thought about. I'm not sure about the other panelists. What do you guys think? Should we have our own manufacturing lines?
Well, I think if you could look at it from a commercial perspective, I think it's cost and benefits. Right. So I think that probably would be the biggest question.
Yeah, I think another way to do it is right now we have a GBA at the back, right? So whether we can collaborate, say Hong Kong, come up with idea, GBA manufacturing, this kind of the collaboration idea, I think can also help. Yeah.
Fantastic. We are coming close to the end of the hour. Actually, I just got another question. Dear panelists, from Kevin Chan, I do very much see the longer term potential of healthcare and biotech industry. Question is, how do I get a chance to work in this industry and become a homegrown talent, given I've already passed mid-career stage with over 20 years in investment management in other industries? Probably too late to start doing a biotech degree now. Any channel for apprenticeship opportunities so I could pick things up on job. Appreciate your advice.
I think it's never too late. According to our findings, a lot of these R&D experts are short of expert on commercialization, having people with better commercial and marketing sense. So I think, and they look for talent with multidisciplinary exposure. So I think your experience would be helpful in helping them on areas that they don't have expertise on. I think it's never too late.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Lots of CFOs roles waiting to be filled up in startups, so I'm sure you can find something.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. For those of you in the audience, please do stay with us. We have a couple of questions for you, just to invite your feedback on today's session and how you would like us to do better in the next sessions and beyond. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Rex, Winnie, Danny, and King for joining this very insightful discussion with the others. And please do read our report on the FSDC website and follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Big thank you to the working group as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.